During an hour-long interview with TRT, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had tough words for Sweden. He reiterated that Ankara won't back Sweden's NATO bid if it continues to allow the burning of the Quran and fails to crack down on terror groups. Sweden and Finland applied to join NATO last year, but have faced opposition from Türkiye. President Erdogan said Sweden has not lived up to the commitments it made to join the alliance, while also turning a blind eye on hate crimes against Muslims. Last week, Swedish authorities allowed an extremist to burn a copy of the Quran in front of the Turkish Embassy, sparking global outrage. Erdogan made the warnings about the rise in Islamophobia days after the Turkish Foreign Ministry issued a travel alert for the US and Europe. It cited a surge in anti-Muslim and racist acts, including growing anti-Turkish rhetoric being pushed by the PKK terror group. In recent weeks, Sweden has seen several large anti-Turkish protests. Now, for more on this, I'm joined by Amina Sharif. She is a researcher on Islamophobia at the Center of Islamic Studies at Cambridge University. And Tarık Oğuzlu, he is a professor of international relations at Istanbul Aydın University. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So, Tarık, Turkey's President Erdogan has reiterated his opposition to Sweden's NATO bid as long as the country allows the Quran burning protests. Are we facing a deadlock here?
I think we have already in the middle of a deadlock, because since the last time the three countries came together to sign a kind of memorandum of understanding concerning the formalities of the accession process of these two northern countries, we have seen that they have not reached a satisfactory outcome so far, despite all kind of numerous high-level talks between the delegations of the countries. And the latest episode that took place in Sweden in recent years seems to have somehow caused a great degree of tension in these trilateral relations. So accusations have been fired between Turkish government and Swedish government at each other. So I am of the view that we are now in the middle of a kind of deadlock. So maybe if Turkey allows its approval, if Turkey lets Finland join the club much earlier than Sweden, that might actually cause a kind of relieving of the tension in the days to come. Let's see how it evolves.
So, Amina, how has Finland and Sweden's NATO bid stoked anti-Türkiye and anti-Islam sentiments across Europe?
Right. So we know that Turkey is the only member state that is refusing to ratify the Swedish and Finnish bid to enter NATO. And we know that Turkey has put various conditions on both countries if they wish to enter. Now, as a predominantly Muslim country, this refusal has sparked outrage by the far right. And the far right is mobilized around this idea that Islam is sort of taking over Europe and European culture, and that Ankara's conditioning of Sweden and Finland's bid to enter NATO would be equivalent to both of these countries sort of bowing to Islam, of Europe being turned into this colonial sort of outpost for Islam.
So, Tarek, and continue, please.
Right. So to burn the Quran in front of the embassy is essentially the statement that Sweden will not succumb and will not be influenced by Turkey.
So, Tarek, we know anti-Turkish sentiments in Sweden existed before the country applied for the NATO membership. Ankara says the PKK terror group is fueling the anti-Turkish sentiments. How influential you think is the PKK in Sweden?
I think we should approach these questions from this particular perspective. Swedish government seems to be eager to find a compromise solution with Turkey to put a stop to this ongoing problem. But the circles in Sweden, I mean PKK and the sympathizers in the Swedish society, the extremely liberal anti-Islamic, anti-Turkish segments of the Swedish society are quite against the idea that Sweden negotiates a kind of compromise solutions with Turkey at the expense of the core Swedish values. But they think that what the Swedish government is doing in this particular context seems to be very much against the idea of so-called Swedish liberal democracy. So in this particular sense, there is a crisis between Swedish government on the one hand and anti-Turkish, anti-Islamic segments of the Swedish society on the other hand, rather than this becoming a problem between two formal governments, Turkish government and Swedish government.
So, Amina, why did a Swedish far-right extremist pick Türkiye's embassy to stage his so-called Quran burning protests? I mean, is it because Türkiye is the only Muslim country in the NATO alliance?
So I think the reason why he picked the Turkish embassy is because what we know of the far right is that they tend to believe that the state is soft on Islamization, and that the state is not doing enough to combat the influence of Islam. And so we can read, this Quran burning outside of the Turkish embassy as this street-level effort to stop this outside influence of Islam from coming in and impacting Swedish and, of course, European policies.
So, Tarek, following anti-Türkiye protests, Ankara has warned its citizens not to travel to Europe. Now, we see several European countries shutting down their consulates in Istanbul, citing security threats. What is really happening?
Actually, this is a kind of tit for tat in international political lexicon. So Swedish government, together with other European governments, have decided to close down their consulates for some particular time period. So Turkish government has responded to such initiative. It seems that this is a crisis, really a crisis. But I don't want to exaggerate the crisis as well, because these kind of things happen during such kind of extremely sensitive periods. If you allow me to back to the original question you raised just a minute ago, I would like to say that Turkey has been a member of NATO since 1952, and any anti-Turkish, anti-Islamist reaction protesting against Turkey has not taken place in the larger international community to the degree what we have been observing nowadays. These people are very much unhappy with the possibility that Sweden and Finland becomes members of NATO alliance in such a way to make Turkey feel extremely comfortable with the demands it has already put on the table. So they don't want to see that Turkey gets something positive from such kind of a negotiation. This is a kind of very much anti-Turkish development taking place, but we should not make it. We should make it very clear that these are the people who don't want to see that their governments somehow negotiate with Turkey in such a way to give some concessions to Turkey, because it seems that they have a problem with Turkish government and the way how we deal with this membership bid of Finland and Sweden.
So, Amina, Türkiye says Quran burning protests should be banned everywhere. And recently, Finnish police announced burning of the Quran will not be allowed in the country. Norway canceled the Quran burning protest, while Sweden's prime minister has said his country's image has been tarnished. So are these countries backing down on their stances?
I think this idea of freedom of expression has been sort of used to allow anti-Muslim hostilities in various European countries. And so there isn't a real commitment to these liberal principles if there are other political sort of, if that poses a political obstacle here, it is, Sweden and Finland's bid to enter NATO. And so I think these principles, these democratic principles of freedom of expression, can easily be scrapped when they are posing an obstacle to other political sort of situations and agendas.
So, Tarek, who is benefiting from the strained ties between Türkiye and the West, especially over these sensitive issues?
Actually, the ones who will benefit from this ongoing developments are the traditional anti-Turkish circles within the Western international community, the PKK and their sympathizers, the so-called terrorist organizations who are free to operate in Swedish territories. They are so happy with that. Maybe if we approach the issue from a kind of conspirational perspective, maybe Russian authorities might feel quite happy to see that the possibility of Finland and Sweden joining the NATO alliance is getting less and less, just because of the protest movements taking place, just because of the way Turkey has responded to these events. Russian authorities, I think, are quite happy with that. Anti-Turkish, anti-Islamic segments are quite happy with that. PKK sympathizers are quite happy with that. And particularly the ones in the United States who are not happy with the ongoing relationship between the US and Turkey are somehow happy with that.
So, given all these skirmishes and diplomatic spats, I mean, could you talk to us about how this is impacting the daily lives of Muslims across Europe?
Definitely. You know, a lot of people are calling this Quran burning as a sort of hate crime. But when we call it a hate crime, what we're doing is that we're focusing on the individual as opposed to the state and the state's responsibility here. Now, we know that the state of Denmark and Sweden and the Netherlands, where this Quran burning happened, all gave authorization for this burning to happen. And so we can't forget that the state is responsible for authorizing and giving permission for this event to take place. What this permission does is that it conveys a statement to the Muslim people living in Europe and beyond, living in the West, that the targeting of Islam is a state-authorized activity. And so for Muslim people, this is felt as a promise of violence. This is felt as a promise that there will be more targeting of Islam and its symbols on the street.
All right, Tarek and Amina, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.